here, and I want to do a little bit more mythology. You guys know I've had this. Turn down the beats here. I love a good beat. It's time to get to work, all right? So, as you guys may, or maybe you don't know, maybe this is your first time checking in here at Nine World Chronicles. If it is, welcome to where we talk about mythology. And today we're back on some modern mythology, or better yet, some modern mythology versus some ancient mythology. And today's episode of this brings us to what I like to call a tale of two Thors. Now, you guys can see here by what we've got on the screen. If you look on my right hand here, we see the we see Marvel comic books representation of Thor, a very popular character who has launched, I think, 4 Thor movies by himself, or 3 Thor movies by himself. I didn't watch the last 2; they were whack. In addition to being a major part of, the whole Avengers and the MCU, so he transitioned very well from a comic book hero into a movie hero. And let's be honest, we're going to contrast this character with the actual myth of Thor. And I'll be really honest here. This Thor here, this comic book representation of Thor, was actually pretty crucial in getting me into both comic books and later a little bit more mythology. If I've explained to you guys before, I started off and I was watching Clash of the Titans as a kid. And that's what got me interested in mythology in general. Somehow I landed on Thor comic book, and I was like, okay, Thor is the guy I was looking for mythology. Landed on that guy. Started reading a little bit about more Norse, and then got into actual mythology like African and Kemetic and Egyptian. So Thor is a crucial character for me. But let's contrast what Hollywood has done, because you guys know about Hollywood. And you know how I feel about Hollywood. They lie all the time. They don't even tell you what their real name. Their real name isn't Hollywood. That's just an alias that they use because they do so much dirt. But let's look at that Thor, which Marvel Comics is selling to all the kids out there, right? And my whole thing is now, if you do a Google search for Thor images, this is a guy that comes up, right? This blonde-haired party boy Thor. But there's a whole nother Thor here. And you know what the funny thing about it is? These two Thors wouldn't even like each other, okay? So on the surface, we can see, obviously, the big difference between mythological Thor here on my left-hand side, comic book Thor on my right-hand side. Now, the first thing we notice is obviously the color and hair. Obviously, Marvel decided that blondes have more fun and decided they were going to have a blonde-haired Thor. That was the first break from the character. Something extremely notable. Yeah. You're the reincarnation of Horus? We're going to talk about that later. But we're going to get back to talking about Thor. So, we can see that the red-headed Thor versus the blonde-haired Thor, it's a big difference. And their personalities go along with those differences. We've seen Marvel's presentation of Thor. Even now, if you watch the Marvel What If, which came out recently, I think it's on like HBO Max or something like that. Or is it Disney? I think it's on Disney. And they show Thor in this absolutely party boy light. Whereas contrast him against the mythological Thor, that's not who this guy was, okay? This mythological Thor, and you can tell why they changed him. Very angry, a lot more beer. Like, they show the beer swilling of comic book Thor, but not to this degree. Physically, they're endowed with the same thing. They still represent the thunder. Now, you can see comic book Thor. I guess it's cooler to fly around with a hammer in hand, because the other Thor didn't really use his hammer to fly. This was mythology. They didn't think about that. He did have these magical goats and this chariot, which would pull him anywhere. I don't know if you know anything about these goats. These are 2 of the best goats you could ever have. Well, thank you. These are 2 of the best goats you could ever have, because at the end of the night, if you're hungry, like Thor often was, you kill these goats and eat them, and they would regenerate in the morning, and they're not even upset that you killed them. But we have to look even further at how they represent it and why it matters. Marvel has, through the power of modern media, almost wiped out the original Thor, right? Important information that we get from a culture and civilization that was telling us about themselves. Their representation of Thor is as much a representation of actually who they are. So when we see this party boy Thor, who has a hammer, hangs out with the Avengers, clearly likes wearing a shirt. This other Thor, you couldn't even get him to wear a shirt. That's one of the other big differences. And, in some of the weaponry that they had, they both wore the belt of strength. You can see naked top Thor's actually got his belt of strength on, and they both had the iron gloves that made him stronger. And apparently, mythological Thor needed those accessories in order to wield that hammer that comic book Thor just wields. And then later on, he doesn't even need the hammer at all. So they completely diminish the value of the hammer to the deity Thor. And the only significant advantage that I see towards the comic book Thor is allowing someone else to completely rewrite a narrative. Now, if you've been watching me, I've been doing Me versus Hollywood for a little bit now. I talked about some of the nonsense we saw in The Mummy surrounding Imhotep. We saw the same type of thing, even worse, in that new Mummy when they just kill Amenet. They just absolutely slander Amenet, and I'm going to talk about that probably in the next installment of these. So the two Thors together seem very similar. They're both hammer wielding. They're both representations of the lightning. They have the chariot and the goat, and they're basically playing the same role as being a guardian for both Asgard and Midgard, and standing there as a defender for the entire 9 realms. But I'm telling you right now, as we sit here, you're letting Hollywood and Marvel Comics steal away mythology from us. And I don't care what your background is. We should all be concerned at how these ancient representations. Remember this story about Thor that comes from what, the Prozetta? Is that their book of mythology? This giant book, the Prozetta, which I think is somewhere in the range of like 1,000 years old, 800, 900 years old. It's somewhere in that range. This is some ancient literature that Marvel decided, hey, we can do a lot better than that. And so they did it, and they produced a whole new Thor, and one day no one will know the difference between ancient mythology Thor and comic book Thor. And comic book Thor might win the day. And I'm guilty of it as well. I have a box full of old Thor comic books. I watch all the movies, but now I'm in a position where I feel like I have to stand up for ancient mythology. So this is just a short one, just to put you guys up on the Thor mythology. Please make sure you check out the real mythologies all the time. Maybe we can fight back. Maybe Me versus Hollywood gets a little bit of momentum going. Maybe we get something going right now, and we start forcing these jackasses to start doing more accurate representations of the mythological characters that we all love, me and you. It's our whole purpose in being here, is sitting here and talking about mythology. So I'm going to stand up for it. Hopefully you'll join me along. But please check out some more videos. Also, I'll be back on Thursday. We're going to take a look at the upcoming Marvel representation of Dr. Michael Morbius. So we're going to talk a little bit of vampire mythology. I have a special guest coming in for that. This is just a solo venture, but I just want to holler at you guys because it's been a couple of days. Thank you again. As always, go back to the channel, check out some more videos. I just uploaded a couple things. What I do, yin yang and some other symbolism stuff. So I was on symbolism this week. Thank you guys again for stepping in. I'm going to step out for a little bit, do some more prep work, and I'll be back on Thursday with a new video